All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Wonk Week keynote. I'm really excited to be here with Anna Palmer and Jake Sherman of Punchbowl News. As folks get logged on, we want to share out a free trial for all Wonk Week attendees to Punchbowl Premium. We're going to put the link in the chat for you to put in your information and claim that. So while we give folks a minute or two to log on to this session, please be sure to fill that link out that my colleague is going to put in the chat in just a moment. Punchbowl Premium includes 3 weekday editions, breaking news, special editions, and in-depth polling of Capitol Hill leaders, deep dives on policy, and market-moving analysis about the people who matter. It also includes exclusive access to private events and more. I myself am a subscriber, and I really find the polling insights especially helpful as our team grows their market knowledge on what's happening on Capitol Hill. So as folks get a minute to fill that out, and we will give folks another minute or two to join in the session. And for folks who watch this on recording tomorrow, as we send out an email, we'll also include the link there. So if you can't see the chat in a video recording, you'll also have access to that trial. Awesome. Now that folks have had a minute or so to log on, we are ready to get started. As I mentioned before, really excited to be joined by Anna and Jake today of Punchbowl News. Some quick introduction. So Jake Sherman is a founder of Punchbowl News. He has been covering national politics for more than a decade, and his focus is reporting on Congress, congressional leadership, and the politics of legislating. He chronicled all of the major legislative battles of the Obama and Trump presidencies and has traveled the country and the world reporting on power and politics. Jake and Anna Palmer are the co-authors of The Hill to Die On, The Battle for Congress, and the Future of Trump's America, which was a New York Times and national bestseller in 2019. He's been reporting and writing partners with Anna and Punchbowl News co-founder John Bresnahan for 11 years. Jake is a contributor to NBC News and appears almost daily across all of the network's platforms. He's a graduate of the George Washington University and Columbia Journalism School. He lives in Washington with his wife and 3 children and is an avid runner and listener of Grateful Dead and Phish. Anna Palmer is CEO and founder of Punchbowl News, a media organization focused on power, people, and politics. Anna has covered congressional leadership, the lobbying industry, presidential campaigns, and politics of governing for more than 15 years. She also has been writing partners with Jake and John for 10 years or so. In 2019, Anna also co-wrote The Hill to Die On, Battle for Congress and the Future of Trump's America. Trevor Noah of The Daily Show said that The Hill to Die On turned Congress into a Game of Thrones book. We were actually just talking about Game of Thrones this morning, so very fitting in the atmosphere. From 2016 to 2020, she was the co-author, along with Jake, of the top-rated Politico Playbook franchise, where they chronicled President Donald Trump's first term and his relationship with top congressional leaders. Under their leadership, the platform more than doubled in revenue and tripled its readership. They also created a widely acclaimed daily podcast, afternoon newsletter, and event series where they interviewed top political and business leaders across the country. Anna is a native of North Dakota and joined Politico in 2011 and was its senior Washington correspondent. She also led Women Rule, a nation-leading platform aimed at expanding leadership opportunities for women, and hosted the critically acclaimed Women Rule podcast. So now I'm going to kick it over to Anna and Jake to get started. They are going to share some remarks with us today, but throughout, feel free to throw your questions in the chat, and we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end as well. So I'll kick it over to you.
All right. Teresa, thank you so much for that kind introduction. Really excited to be here this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you are. I'm in Central Time.
Me too.
Just to remind, yeah.
And we're not even together, so we're both in Central Time.
Just a reminder, as Teresa said, if you want to check out Punchbowl News Premium, which is our midday and PM editions, we have a free trial that we'd love for you all to sign up with. We're going to talk a little bit about our theory of the case around Punchbowl News, what's happening with the midterms, kind of forecast a little bit in terms of the lame duck and leadership, what might happen, and want to take tons of questions. We're happy to talk about whatever you all want to talk about. So first of all, I'll go kind of start pretty quickly. Punchbowl News, we hope that you are familiar with us. If you aren't, we are a news media startup that launched January 3rd, right before the January 6th insurrection. So we're a little over a year and a half old, focused on power, people, politics. We have kind of a morning newsletter that was really the front door to what's happening in Washington. And then that midday and PM edition where we kind of dive deeper. We recently have expanded our kind of very leadership coverage, focused coverage in terms of also adding financial services, which we're super excited about. And the only other thing I'll talk about, and then I'll kind of throw it to you, Jake, and we kind of get into more the meat of the conversation, is one of the things that we are super proud of, particularly for our premium members, is that community aspect of it. So we really try to think of ways to engage our audience as community members, whether that's coming to our events, whether that's joining our brown bag lunches that we do once a month, where you can directly ask all of us questions about what's happening, or, just kind of in terms of really being a convening force on Capitol Hill. So why don't we get started, Jake? I will tee it up to you to talk about what we've been talking about all for the past, several weeks, but the midterm elections less than 30 days away, and things are certainly looking very interesting.
Wait, I had that on the calendar for next year. Is that this year? No, I'm kidding. Well, I want to add one thing, and I'm scrolling through the attendees. And when we created this company, we created it for you. You're the kinds of people who, if you're not reading Punchbowl News, you should be. So that's my pitch. I am on the road right now with a member of House leadership. We are very deep in the leadership world and all of those things, and Congress. And the thing we're proud of is we don't chase shiny objects. Not interested in scandal du jour, as we were telling Teresa before. We're not covering Lizzo and her flute, the flute thing, which wouldn't be in our coverage area anyway. But let's talk about the election in a couple of weeks. So what I keep saying, and what we said in the newsletter this morning, is, and I think that we have there are, let's say, 50 seats in play in the House. Let's start with the House. There are 50 seats in play. And by the way, please leave your comments and questions in the chat. We will definitely get to as many as humanly possible over the next 38 minutes, and we'll maybe address some during this talk or after we finish our remarks. But there are 50-something seats in play, and Republicans need to win 5. To take back the House.
Because of the special election. We should just note that, right? Because they're going to win that special election seat, right? They are,
yeah, exactly. So they need to win a handful. They're going to win they're going to win a deep red seat in Indiana. But so 10% of the seats in play, they need to win the majority. And there are seats that have been shored up because of redistricting. So our base case of Democrats who speak honestly and Republicans who speak honestly is that you're looking at a likelihood, not certainty, far from certainty. Nothing is certain in politics, that Republicans will take back the House. Now, the margin by which they do it is a big question. I just got off the phone with someone who's extraordinarily involved in the elections on the spending side, on the Republican side, who said that they think they will win 22 seats, and their confidence level of that is very high. That's a lot of seats. If you end up in the 230s, you're looking at a relatively large Republican majority. By historical standards, not a massive pickup, but quite a large pickup in terms of being in the 230s for a 2-year period of the last 2 years of Joe Biden's first term. So we have some data that we're going to lead with tomorrow morning in Punchbowl News AM, just about how dominant right now Republicans are on the spending side. Republican organizations have raised, for House races, $525 million. The CLF, the Congressional Leadership Fund, the main House Republican, we can't even say outside group now, the main House Republican election group, bigger than the NRCC, more dominant than the NRCC, has spent $200 million already, and there are 20-something days left. So when it comes to the House of Representatives, Republicans feel very bullish on where they are and where they'll be in 20-something days. Anna, do you have any thoughts on the House before we move on to the Senate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, you summed it up really well. I think what we've seen, and we've been talking a lot about this, is just this dominance that the Republicans have on the money front in the House, in particular, just with their ability to fundraise at the super PAC level. I mean, Kevin McCarthy's really perfected that in a way that we haven't seen Democrats do. I think the question for Democrats is going to be, 22 seats. Yes, that's a strong majority, but it's certainly not the 60 seats that Kevin McCarthy was talking about just months ago. ago. And so I feel like for us, if you talked to us 6 months ago, a lot of House Democrats, it was almost like dead man walking a little bit, right? Where they didn't see an opportunity. They were really felt like they were going to lose, and just this dramatic shift. And I think certainly over the summer, the Supreme Court decision with Dobbs, I think when you look at some of the what they've been putting a lot of their campaign ads about, whether that's the Inflation Reduction Act and other things, they do feel like there's a little bit more confidence. I'm not sure that a lot of people believe that Speaker Nancy Pelosi is going to retain, and not only retain the majority, but also gain seats. That's the prediction she's made in recent weeks. I think a lot of people are skeptical of that, but either way, a House, we'll talk more about what a Republican majority would look like. But I think as much as the Dobbs decision is playing in the House, we certainly are seeing that in the Senate. So why don't we just shift over to the Senate? I think obviously a very different situation than the House in terms of just how tight a lot of the races are. This should have been a very good year for Republicans. The map was in their favor. Although Mitch McConnell often says, don't fall in love with the map. I think one of the key things that we've reported on a lot was something else he said, which is that candidate quality matters. And we're seeing that play out in a lot of these key states, whether that's in Arizona, certainly in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, and elsewhere, where you have Republicans really in an uphill battle in some of these cases where we would have thought, just looking at the demographics, it would have been probably an easier fight.
Yes, let's talk about the Senate. I have no confidence level at all about where the Senate's going to end up. Zero confidence. I think the base case of a lot of people on both sides is something like Democrats keep holding Arizona, losing Nevada, winning Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. I feel like it's too close at this point to call. I do think Fetterman has a slight advantage, although I don't know how robust an advantage that is. And every single poll so far in Georgia, everyone basically has Raphael Warnock beating Herschel Walker, the kind of scandal-plagued Herschel Walker in these last. Quinnipiac poll yesterday had him up, I think, 5 or 6. So every single race there seems to be. Every single poll there in Georgia seems to be pointing in the same direction. Ohio seems to be tightening. I think Democrats will be disappointed. Ohio's quite red. And then there's what the leadership of the Senate says. North Carolina always disappoints them, always lets them down. Very close race between Beasley and Ted Budd in North Carolina for Richard Burr's Senate seat. That would be a pickup for Democrats. So I think the real scenario that we need to think about is that the Senate might not be decided until December with a runoff, right? If no one wins, if no one gets above 50, we are in we're in a runoff situation, and that will have a lot of impacts. And I guess, Anna, we could get into the lame duck at this point.
Yeah.
And we could get into what that would look like in the post-election period. I will start off with a little bit about what I expect. And from there, I think we could hold on one second. Someone's actually knocking at my hotel door. So Anna, why don't you?
Why don't I take it out?
Actually,
I'll take it away.
I got it. They left. So
Okay.
the must do's at this point are number one, a government funding bill by December 16th. I think this is going to be complicated, more complicated than many people think. Why? First of all, it's a compressed time period. Elections November 8th. They come back November whatever, that's 14th or something, that Monday. And that leaves them a month and 2 days to get their act together and get an omnibus bill, a bill that will fund the government until September 31st, 2023. I do think that, and I do think the runoff in Georgia will impact that. I mean, if you don't know what the makeup is going to be next year, I think a lot of people are going to be less willing to deal. And the appropriators will take the lead on this, but I just think they'll be much less willing to deal. Now, I will talk about one other thing very briefly. If the Biden administration was smart, and I'm not saying they're not smart, but if they're smart in this scenario, they would push for a debt ceiling increase in December in the lame duck. They won't. I'd give it a 10 to 15% chance. They won't even really talk about it at this point. That would be helpful to all players in Washington to get that out of the way before, if Republicans take the majority. Anna, go ahead. I know you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've been kind of we've been talking about this debt limit because I think it's one of the biggest issues, because obviously if House Republicans do take the majority, it is going to be very, very difficult for them to find the votes to raise it. I think there's a couple other issues that, as you said, must-dos, right? You have this kind of omnibus package that's going to fund the government. You have the NDAA that always gets reauthorized. And then there's a lot of other things. And I think that the most important thing is depending on how this all shakes out, there's going to be an effort, even if we don't know what the majorities are, to clear the decks. Certainly when it comes to the same-sex marriage bill that Schumer decided to postpone until after the election. Certainly when it comes to electoral reform and the bipartisan effort that has been happening in both the Senate and the House, but certainly in the Senate, has really garnered a lot of support on both sides of the aisle. Each of those bills would probably take about a week, though, so you have to think that it eats up the calendar there. And I think the other thing, and we've talked a bit about this, I'm much more skeptical that anything actually happens, is on DACA, on immigration. I think there's going to be a big push based on what has happened in the courts recently, but it is, I think, very, very difficult to see anything happen. I think Republicans and Democrats are more divided when it comes to immigration and this issue than probably ever before.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to NDAA, you have to look for permitting reform, which was a big push by Joe Manchin as part of the government funding bill that passed a month ago. And then you have a bunch of tax provisions that will lapse, that are beginning to lapse, that are beginning to phase out. Too many to talk about here in the time that we have. And I haven't looked at the questions. We'll get them. I'm sure there's questions on all these topics at the end, but we'll address all those at the end. I do think that Anna makes a really important point that I want to emphasize once again. All of these things take a week on the Senate floor. One thing that I know, excuse me, a lot of people must be interested in is the big tech bill, the antitrust bill that has been going through the Senate. I think despite what Amy Klobuchar says, there's not 60 votes for that bill. And I think that's going to be really difficult. The tech companies have fought that hard, and it didn't come up for a reason. And they're going to make a big push and a big stink in November, December to bring that up. I'm just very skeptical about that. I could be proven wrong. I think I don't see that. I don't see that happening.
Yeah, I just want to note we actually have Marsha Blackburn next Wednesday at a Punchbowl News event on Capitol Hill at 9 a.m. that you can also stream, but also be in person, where we're going to be talking about this and the likelihood. She's been working a lot on terms of apps and what's happening with that, and been in terms of kind of where she sees the Klobuchar bill. She's not supportive of it. So going to be an interesting conversation, Jake. We'll be kind of teasing out a lot of those themes that you just talked about.
Yeah. Okay. So Anna, we should move on to our next topic here before we completely run out of time. Let's talk about what to expect in 2023. This is something we're spending a ton of time thinking about and reporting on, because you can't start on November 9th. You can't start thinking about the climate next year on November 9th. So if let's talk about the leadership in the House first. I mean, let's just dispense with this quickly. Mitch McConnell is going to be the Senate Republican leader, and Chuck Schumer is going to be the Senate Democratic leader. Period. I don't give any credence, based on my spending every day in the Capitol and reporting on this, that there's going to be any challenge to them, any successful challenge to them. Anyone can challenge them, but it's not going to be successful. So moving over to the House, start on the Republican side and assume for a second we could play all the scenarios out. If Republicans take the majority, first of all, if Republicans don't win the majority, the entire leadership could be gone. McCarthy will be gone. Scalise probably survives. Stefanik probably survives, but that is that. If they do win the majority, McCarthy, I think McCarthy will be Speaker. I think I don't really, and we'll get into this next week in the newsletter, so please subscribe. But McCarthy feels quite confident that no matter the margin, he's going to be Speaker. Caveat is he felt confident in 2015 that he was going to be Speaker, and he was not. But he feels very confident this time around he's going to be Speaker. No challenge to Steve Scalise as majority whip. Number three, as majority leader, sorry. Number three will be majority whip, which we wrote about this morning, which is a contest between Jim Banks of Indiana, Tom Emmer of Minnesota, and Drew Ferguson of Georgia. I give Banks an edge, a slight edge in that race. at this point. I think Emmer and Ferguson both have cases for it. I don't know that they will be. I don't know that they can put it together. Emmer's been taking it real slow, and I've covered enough of these things to know that if you take it slow, you're in a bad spot. So that
wanna
is,
ask you about
yeah,
something,
please. I was going to kick it
because
to
I
you.
think
Yeah.
it's important. So like, there's not that much drama right at the top, 1, 2, 3, but I actually think the bigger kind of, dynamic that we are going to see unfold, and we already have started to see unfold, is this push by conservatives to try and get concessions from McCarthy, right? Whether it's we're only put bills of the majority agree on. I mean, I think we saw this play out certainly in the Boehner, Paul Ryan years with the Freedom Caucus with Mark Meadows and Jim Jordan. How that to me is going to be an interesting subplot within the context of this leadership.
Yeah, McCarthy doesn't take kindly to that stuff. Basically, his view on this is, I'm not going to be leveraged. You want to run against me and do it your way, do it your own way. That could change in the heat of the moment, but he's not going to do the majority thing. He's not going to do a lot of the stuff that they're demanding, and I think that's important to keep in mind as we get toward the majority. Now, on the Democratic side, we've been wrong about Nancy Pelosi for 12 years. I thought she wouldn't survive 2010. She's the most prolific speaker. I mean, she will not be spoken in the same breath as some of the last speakers that we've seen ever. I mean, she's probably the most effective legislator of our lifetime, whether you like her or hate her. If you can't admit that, then you're not looking at it with a dispassionate view and with an honest view of the situation. I think Hakeem Jeffries is obviously in the up and coming bunch the most promising candidate for something. I don't think Steny Hoyer and Jim Clyburn are going to go quietly into the night. It's not their style. Hoyer's got nothing else to do. I mean, he wants to be in the House. He loves being in the House. It's an institution in which he served for 40 years. I think that he is going to make a run for it. I don't know how that works out or works itself out. It's going to be something that we are, positively obsessed with in November and December. Just covering all that's daunting, but it's like our Super Bowl is what we say. Anna, do you have any thoughts on that? And please drop a question, everybody, if you have any questions about the leadership stuff.
We're going to get to questions soon. I mean, I think what's going to be really interesting is this generational shift, right? I mean, if you look at House Democratic leadership, it has been in the same positions. The people have been in the same positions for over a decade, right? I mean, if you think about it, there's been a whole generation of Democrats who have either gone to run for other office or left the House or lost because of frustration around the fact that there wasn't the ability to move up. And so as this kind of octogenarian, leadership will likely be exiting, I think the real question is going to be how not only does Hakeem Jeffries kind of keep people together, what does his speakership look like? Who's going to fill the fundraising void, which has been always one of Pelosi's biggest, kind of points to advocate for her leadership. But I think also, do they make other systemic changes that allow for people to come up, right? The leadership and seniority that has been something that has really been part of the whole Democratic caucus for a very long time. I think there's a lot of younger and newer members who are agitating against that. We just interviewed Adam Schiff out in Texas, and he, is somebody who's making a long shot bid to try to do something in leadership, and said that he would be open to not having, there being term limits or thinking about leadership of committees in a different way. I think clearly a nod to the fact that there is this frustration.
Yeah. And I just want to add one more thing that might be a little bit far afield, but when you think about raising money and Pelosi leaving, the Democrats really need to get their arms around the complete cash disparity between Republicans and Democrats in the House. It's stunning. And if you're a Democrat and you're blaming the fact that Republicans have bigger donors and more corporations that donate, I mean, that's not an argument that moves me, and it doesn't move many members. Because you can't bring a broom to a knife fight, or a knife to a gunfight, I guess. It's not going to work, and they need to get their arms around this and quickly, because CLF, the Republican super PAC, raised $73 million last quarter. House Majority PAC, the Democratic super PAC, I think raised $55 million. It's getting to a point where Democrats are just totally behind the eight ball when it comes to spending. So anyway, that is that topic. Let's move on before we get to questions, Anna.
Yeah, I think we're probably about at
Oh
time.
yeah, we
for
are at questions. Yes.
actually. So we want to make sure we have plenty of
Awesome.
time. Please jump into the chat. Some questions. I mean, I think we can fill the time here as well and talk about other things. I feel
Yeah.
like
So
this
let's go from the bottom here. We talked about attaching electoral reform to NDAA. So I hadn't thought about that, but let me think about it as I answer this question. Electoral reform does not, NDAA, they're going to try to keep it clean. Jack Reed and Jim Inhofe are going to try to keep it as clean as possible. Could they attach it? Sure. It would be interesting because Cruz and those guys are against it. It's not a horrible idea, but But Schumer has showed that he wants to pass things on their own weight, and I think that he's going to want to do that here. Anna, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think they want to do this bill separate. I mean, maybe they catch it. I mean, because it's gotten such bipartisan support, but I don't know. I feel like this is something they want to make a statement on this. I mean, they've been spending a lot of time on it and what it means for.
I mean, it would get. Listen, it would get. It would get. So let me put it this way. It would already get 60. So I mean, it's just a time issue. So if they start the clock on it, they could get 60 and they could get it through, and they could get it through the House quite easily. So I would be a no on doing that. I would think, but I hear the argument on both sides of that. Okay, so how do the midterm elections influence effective workplace policy depending on the outcome? I think this is referring to workplace. I don't know if it's referring to workplace policy broadly or workplace policy in the House. I think I'll address both. If Republicans win the majority, they will they will turn back the policy of individual offices being able to unionize. That I could say for a fact. And we'll again get into that a little bit more next week in our newsletter. Healthcare, workplace development. I don't think I haven't heard much chatter on that. I think that this gets to a larger point, which is a lot of this is a black box, because here's the dynamic to consider. McCarthy, for all of his skills and weaknesses, one of his weaknesses is policy. He's going to be, and every speaker says this. I guess actually Pelosi never really said this, but every Republican speaker says they're going to devolve power to the committees. I actually think McCarthy needs to. He doesn't have much of a choice. He doesn't have a giant policy staff. He just lost his policy director, a smart guy, Will Dunham, who is respected by both sides of the aisle. So he's going to have to devolve some of this to the committee. Anna, so do you want to?
Yeah, but I think they're probably talking more about broadly, like actual workplace development, maybe, and workplace. There's so many issues with workers right now. I mean, I don't think that this is going to be something that's going to be key to a Republican agenda. I think the question would be is how much. I mean, so much of the Republican agenda, if they're in the majority, will be on oversight and trying to rein in. Frankly, I think the Biden administration and some of the agency-related kind of efforts that they have done to try to circumvent Congress in a lot of ways. So I think that's going to be probably what you watch. I want to answer this question because it's something I think is going to be super interesting. Cody asks about, given the popularity of the advanced CTC payments, do you see a post-election push for a child tax credit legislation? I think that it would be really interesting to see if you have a Republican majority. There's a lot of members, particularly in the Senate, that have been historically more supportive of the child tax credit. That it has really become, kind of less popular in the current environment. I could see, you could see a Susan Collins and some of the more moderate Democrats try to come together on this in a less politicized environment.
I would say also, broadly speaking, to zoom out a little bit, one of the things that's not getting a lot of attention, but a lot of people in our world, meaning members, are talking about, is that you have to keep in mind that the Republican tax bill largely is beginning to expire. Some of the provisions are beginning to wind down, are beginning to, and I think at the end of, expensing, a ton of provisions collapse at the end of 24. So this Congress is going to have to deal with it. You're looking at a 2024, an end of 2024, that's very much like the end of 2010, in which you're seeing a ton of tax provisions go away. Now, I've heard some talk recently about using reconciliation on a bipartisan basis to get some of these things through. we'll have to see how that works out. But I think a lot of those provisions are going to Republicans will try to make them permanent. That's not going to go anywhere in the Senate. But that's something to keep in mind. Farm bill, Anna, grew up on a farm. Considering the climate change related measures, including the Infrastructure Act, do you foresee more debate than usual regarding the 2023 Farm Bill? Yeah, I do. The Farm Bill will be G.T. Thompson will be the House Agriculture Committee chairman if Republicans take the majority. This is going to be a huge priority. I think the Farm Bill is always really hard, and I think right now in the House, you're not going to have anybody as ranking member or as chair who has done a farm bill before, whereas you had Colin Peterson and people in the past who had been involved in agriculture policy for a very long time. So I think that's going to be a very difficult dynamic to deal with. And again, if you'll remember back in the last farm bill, which I don't remember when it was, 2013 maybe, that was really Boehner was very involved in that as somebody who covered that. He was very involved in that. It was really a speaker heavy proposition. Go ahead, Anna. Sorry.
I think inflation and I think the price of commodities are going to be a big thing to watch when it comes to the Farm Bill. I think that it complicates matters a lot depending on where the economy is with it. And I agree with you, Jake. I actually think Boehner played a huge role in that. I think it'll be interesting to see what kind of position McCarthy takes, if he actually gets involved on the policy angle of it or not. But certainly going to be something to watch. And a lot of the members on the Senate side that were kind of the traditional Farm Bill, advocates have retired or left office. So also going to be interesting to see who plays a big role there.
And remember the unusual alliance of Black urban Democrats and white rural Republicans has frayed in the last couple of years, and there will just be a ton of discussion around food stamps, around all sorts of social safety net programs when it comes to the Farm Bill. I think you can't underestimate that. And I don't want to get too far into this, but there's some discussion in some quarters of the crypto world that they want to fold crypto into the Agriculture Committee. The Ag Committee has a piece of that because it does deal with derivatives. It does deal with some of those kinds of things. But I don't anticipate that being a big thing. Depending on election outcomes, who do you anticipate leading House Ed and Labor and Senate Help? So House Ed and Labor is a black box at this point. If Jim Banks does not become the majority whip, there's been some chatter that he could take the Ed and Labor chairmanship. McCarthy has been very skeptical of granting waivers, which would allow Virginia Fox to lead that panel again. He basically has said he's not interested in granting waivers to their term limit rule. In fact, he'd go the other direction. Senate Help, the number 2 and number 3 Republicans are Rand Paul and Susan Collins. Susan Collins, if Republicans take the majority, would be the appropriations chairman, so it won't be her. I think Patty Murray obviously is the top Democrat. If she hangs on in Washington State, which I think a lot of people expect that she will, she'll have it. Could Rand Paul take it? Sure. I don't see that being far afield. A dark horse candidate for Dem leadership, Anna, what do you think?
That's a good question. I mean, I think all eyes are on Hakeem Jeffries, thinking that it's his to lose. I mean, I would say the dark horse is Adam Schiff. I mean, it's hard for me to see that his pathway, just given the dynamics in the House, but there's nowhere else for him to go, right? In terms of California politics, obviously very ambitious, wants to take a leadership role coming out of kind of his position on January 6th in terms of the impeachments, has been doing a ton of fundraising. So I think if there's somebody who is putting the pieces together, I think it's certainly him in terms of to be able to make that kind of a case. I also think interesting to see what Jayapal does. She's been certainly, kind of leading the progressive caucus, and has held. It's always interesting when a member right before an election is holding a press conference call with Capitol Hill press corps versus doing other things. And so I think she's not said exactly what that is, but I could see her also. She's just an interesting person to watch because clearly has kept the CPC and has gotten a lot of wins, in the House, I think, in that role in a way that she's kind of matured as a leader.
I would also look at Sarah Jacobs for DCCC. She's been a prolific fundraiser and is well liked by a lot of people. Very young. I think she's 34 years old, comes from a lot of money, which is always helpful when you're asking people for money to be independently wealthy yourself. Moving on to the next question, whether Rawa has a chance in the lame duck. Rawa is the wildlife conservation bill, I believe, that Debbie Dingell, I believe, is a sponsor of, if my memory serves me well. I'm not tracking that, to be completely honest. I don't know whether that has any chance. I think, again, trouble getting anything done. I'll take the next one. Anna, international trade or tax policy. Yeah, I mean, they're going to try to get an extenders bill, and that could be attached to an omni that could roll separately.
Think small. I mean, is what I would say.
But I agree. I just think that there are some things that are expiring that need attention. Senate leadership post McConnell. Could one of the Johns or Rick Scott make a play? Rick Scott can't. Rick Scott would not find a lot of votes in the Senate Republican conference. If McConnell leaves after 2 years, which I think is a better than even bet, after he passes Mike Mansfield's record for the longest serving Senate leader, it's going to be between John Cornyn, John Thune, and John Barrasso, which we have dubbed the three Johns, aptly enough. Let's talk about them for a second, Anna. John Thune's advantage is he's in leadership now. He's the Senate Republican whip. He is liked by the younger members. He's a big fundraiser, but Cornyn's a huge fundraiser. McConnell seems to favor Cornyn, although he won't say it. I think Barrasso's probably the last of the bunch. But Cornyn and Thune have made no secret of their desire to be Mitch McConnell's successor. Do you have any thoughts on them, Anna?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, we've written a ton about this. I think that one of the things that hopefully is a real advantage to our readers is the fact that, like, we are chronicling these every twist and turn, whether it's what they're doing in the fundraising sense, what they're doing in terms of policy, debate. I think Rick Scott clearly, I mean, I don't know what his pathway forward in the Senate is even. I mean, after running the NRSC, I think, in my mind, I think both Cornyn and Thune clearly, have shown that they're adept. I think Cornyn took some really interesting moves this past year in terms of doing the gun safety bill, in terms of took. It wasn't necessarily popular in a lot of places in his home state, but was willing to kind of lead on that. I think the fact that was able to get done was one of an example of him saying, sometimes for the institution, you need to take positions, and for the country. And that leadership will be interesting to see whether or not how that plays within his own conference.
So I think we are almost. There are some other.
We've got about 5 minutes or so. I would actually love to interject with a question, if you don't mind. I'm curious from your perspective, both as political experts and as reporters. In the past day or so, NBC News came out with a new interview with John Fetterman, where he used closed captioning in his interview as a result of some of his recovery from a stroke. That got a lot of criticism in the way that interview was handled. I'm curious, one, how much do you see his health issues still playing a role in some of that polling or people's support of him? And what would your approach be to kind of handle that situation, to not have some of the blunders that some folks are calling out the way NBC News handled that?
I think it's really easy to criticize reporters. I think people do it. And to not acknowledge, I mean, I wasn't there, so I have no idea of the extent to which he had trouble talking, or I don't know. I don't have any visibility into it. He's very clear that he needs closed captioning. He's just suffered a stroke. It's an academic argument to say, should he have dropped out? Should he have done this? I mean, he had to drop out, I think, by August, middle to end of August, if he thought he couldn't handle it. He's clearly having some trouble, which all experts indicate he will be likely to recover from. I don't know how I would have handled it. It's very easy to take shots from the sidelines and say, well, that's horrible, or that's great, or she did a great job, or I don't know what kind of pressure she was under internally. I just don't know anything about that. I think candidates' health is fair game to talk about, but I hear the complaints, and I think someone made an argument to me. There are plenty of people on planet Earth who are following this race who also have problems communicating and who are otherwise I don't want to be insensitive, who are otherwise hampered by problems that they have, right? That they have trouble communicating or some other handicap or disability that is difficult for them, and this could be inspiring for them. Anna, what do you think? Have you given much thought? I haven't given a ton of thought to this.
I haven't either. I mean, I think I agree with everything you say about I'm very loath to criticize other reporters and reporting in general. I think
except me. You could feel free to criticize me, and you do
true.
so.
Every morning on the Daily Punch. No, I'm just kidding. No, I mean, I think candidate health is clearly clearly in the purview of being reported on, and is certainly something that can be top of mind when a voter comes in. I think all of these polls are real snapshots, so we'll have to see how that impacts it. The biggest thing is going to be, I think, the debate. I think for him, being able to explain why he needs to be reading instead of the auditory challenges that he's clearly having, I think will be a challenge for his campaign, that they're going to have to find the way to communicate that. And obviously Republicans feel like this is something that they have an advantage on. So if we're going to see this play out for the next, 26 days.
The bigger challenge also leave aside all these dynamics, is that Doug Mastriano, the Republican gubernatorial candidate, is getting smoked. And that's a big problem for the Republicans kind of down the ticket, is that he's not much to consider, considering he's losing about 15 or 20 points in every poll. Anything else, Teresa? You had some questions. I'm happy to.
Yeah, I guess my last question. So January 6th last hearing today that's being televised. What do you see the kind of lasting impact over these next couple of weeks being of that, and any October surprises that you think could come down the line with Trump?
Well, I've gotten into the game of putting away my crystal ball because I have no idea what's ever going to happen ever.
It's not a surprise if you can predict it, I guess.
Yeah, January 6th hearing today is going to be interesting to watch. I'm obviously not there. We have our reporter Max Cohen, who just sent me a photo, dropped a photo in our Slack from the room, so he's there. I think it's 2.5 hours, so get your popcorn or get a beer or whatever you feel like watching the event with. It is the lasting impact. I mean, this has been probably the most successful congressional committee I've ever seen. And it's uncovered a lot, really a lot. And I don't know that it has much impact in 2022. I think that it's just been a historic investigation that's been handled quite well. Anna, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think John Bresahan, our colleague and one of the founders of Punchbowl News, really had a great write-up when it came to the lasting impact. I mean, there's been a lot of things that were very unprecedented and that will certainly impact, I think future committees, if there's anything ever with the next select committees like this. I think they've done a very good job in terms of telling the story that they wanted to tell. Now it's just kind of, we're trying to figure out what are the findings going to be and what else comes forward, right? I mean, it's going to be Roger Stone today. They're not going to have any people testifying, so it's going to be interesting. It certainly has captivated, as two people who have reported on and watched a lot of hearings, it has certainly captivated people in a different way than most congressional hearings.
I want to also just add one other plug here. I'm very easy to reach. I'm Jake at punchbowl.news. If you have any questions about what we do or Congress or anything, I'm always around. I'm like the most reachable human being on earth. I don't read many Twitter DMs. Let me put it this way. I'm very likely to miss those. So if you have any thoughts or questions or thoughts about Congress or our company, please get in touch. Always happy to engage. Anna too. So anyway, thank you.
Thanks so much for having us. We appreciate it. And please subscribe to Punchbowl News.
Yes, wonderful. Thanks everyone for your time.
Thanks.
And we'll give it a second here.